This is China's newest hero nicknamed the 800 Bro, who set his workplace on fire over repeated failure to get his wage. And why this actually relates to Trump revoking Harvard's ability to have international students. Chinese internet is calling this man a hero after he set his workplace on fire over 800 yuan, or about 120 USD. And that's the salary that he was owed after he had left the job. But he tried to repeatedly claim this amount for his earnings, but of course he couldn't get it. And because it was a textile factory, the fire burned for 2 days. He was immediately arrested after this incident, and people are reacting quite interestingly because most people you would think would be condemning his action, but no, the opposite happened. He's actually being hailed as a people's hero. Now, obviously, some people are still condemning his action, but the majority of them support it. And he did also warn all the workers in the factory, so nobody died. And of course, we don't condone any violence, but we still have to understand what is actually the reason behind something like this taking place in China, prompting to things like animations, cartoons, and even videos supporting him. Now, let's first talk about the police report. After explaining about this whole arsonist situation, the police then clarifies that actually this man is owed about 5,000 yuan. He had received 80% of it, and this 800 yuan, which is the amount that basically led to this incident, is in the process of seeking approval, and it will be eventually given to him. Now, anybody that's read China news for a very long time would know that this is the official way of saying we're probably never going to give the money to you, but we're going to drag it out in the system because it's still being approved. That's basically the same as saying that there is no unfinished homes in China and that real estate developers, who by the way have billions of dollars in debt, defaulting, are simply in the process of finishing their home. So, people that have paid hundreds of thousands of yuan, their life savings to buy this home, eventually they will get it. Or that China has no ghost cities. These are simply, in the process of being built, or people are in the process of moving in. This leads to the reason why that somebody would resort to violence if the legal processes don't work. Well, actually, that's the reality. This is a culmination of, you would say, this year's biggest situation when it comes to workers, which is unpaid or delayed payments of their salaries. And this really has happened so much. I've done so many videos on this already where, workers, factory workers, auto workers, production workers, they are begging for the factory owner or whatnot to pay them on time, and they're simply not getting paid on time. And this is also a culmination of this huge divide between the government and the people. The irony here, of course, is that this violent proletariat revolution against the capitalist or the bourgeoisie class actually happened in a communist country or a socialist country, whatever they want to call it. But that's so funny because, yeah, the whole time that your Marxist teaching was about rise up against those who are suppressing your workers' rights, well, they actually did it, and guess what the response is? Well, the police came for him and everybody else that are allegedly rumor mongers. So the police are not on the side of the people, obviously, and they're there to protect the larger interest, which obviously in this case is the factory owner. But the bigger one is the government and by extension, the party, right? The Chinese Communist Party, because all of these sort of powers are interconnected. So that's why I say there's a huge divide between the people and the party, and the very principles that the Marxist teachings tell you to do is now being used against them. So it's a taste of their own medicine. And the bigger idea here, or the fear, is that today they burn a factory, tomorrow they might burn a local government building, next day, who knows, they might be marching on Beijing with Molotovs, because guns and weapons are hard to come by in China because they don't allow that. Even cleavers are chained to with chains. But fire is everywhere. You can set a place on fire, and if that's how a revolution starts in China, so be it. Because it's gotten to that point where people realize that legal processes in China don't really work. It is when you do use those extra legal, so to speak, or illegal ways to do things, that's when you start to raise the alarm. And the idea that there's overwhelming support here really justifies why this happened, because every fire that burns is actually a message, or you could say that it is a representation of a misery that has taken place in China. So every time this type of social event happens, it's much bigger than just the issue itself. So it's almost like 800 Bro is speaking for the millions without really speaking, but through his actions. So how does this story actually relate to Harvard and their ties to the CCP? Well, after looking at the situation, you might be thinking, well, these people seem a little bit crazy, whether for good or bad. Maybe they need an exorcism or some supplements. Let me introduce to you Gen X American Ginseng Extract, which is the natural way to level up your energy, focus, and immune game without turning into a human espresso machine. So I've been taking Gen X extracts for about 2 years, more than 2 years, and the results really speak for themselves. It comes in two forms. You have this easy to use dropper form, and then also you have the regular paste form. Now both of these are wonderful for home use or for when you're traveling. So we've all chased that second cup of coffee only for it to crash you at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. But with Gen X, the energy that you get is very consistent throughout the day, and of course with no crash. There's no shakes, there's no burnout, and it ensures you that you can actually be productive throughout the whole day. And so staying awake doesn't feel like it's an Olympic event. 2 drops of this stuff slices through mental haze like it's a hot knife on a butter. Now everybody benefits from this, whether you're young, old, or somewhere in between. Gen X strengthens your natural defense, which is exactly what we need right now in the season of cold, flus, and everything else. And yet, natural supplements are trending, but Gen X is regulated by the Canadian equivalent of the FDA, so their products are of highest quality and control. Ready to stop operating at 20%? Hit the link in the description or in the comment and get your Gen X American Ginseng Extract today. Your brain, your body, and probably your work boss will be thanking you for taking the supplement. Okay, now let's talk about the Harvard's connection. I'm gonna leave the free speech issue and the other international relations for other people to talk about, because that's a whole different topic for a whole day worth of discussion. What I'm going to focus on is the extensive ties Harvard has had, which the CCP cultivated over the past few decades. And it really comes in 2 key aspects. The first one is very simple. Harvard has many international students from China who belong to their parents are high CCP officials. And for example, Xi Jinping's daughter, Xi Mingze, was one who attended Harvard under a pseudonym, along with other offsprings of the CCP officials. And the second aspect is that Harvard has been a training and educational institutions to further advance the CCP's persecution against its own people and against various religion and political groups. So these include officials who have participated in human rights violations. These include military or military-tied officials who are actually trying to get technology, get medical, get scientific developments out of these so-called study sessions or training education courses. For example, it was recently found that Harvard had trained members of the XPCC, which is one of the primary perpetrator of genocide in Xinjiang against the Uyghur population. The stuff that the CCP sends its people to learn from Harvard, and of course other American universities as well, have been used to further advance their technology on surveillance, censorship, on ideological control, as well as on cultural control. So a lot of the stuff that they learned from the American universities are being used against their own people. And that's obviously a fear that they have. What has just happened with the 800 Bro is precisely the stuff they're trying to contain over the years. So they have learned from the best of the American education system, of course, to try to make it so that they're one step ahead of their people who are trying to find freedom or who are trying to express their misery that they've suffered in China. Yet to the CCP, this whole thing, that this brewing flame within the people in China, it's a dire situation for them. And Harvard has played a great role in helping them to contain that. And get this, right? That training against the group that was doing the persecution against the Uyghurs, it started after the pandemic in 2020. And this was also the same year that the Trump administration had put in this order and sanctions on Chinese companies who had participated in those kind of human rights violations. And those trainings continued until as recent as last year. And also in another episode that draws concerns here, U.S. business intelligence firm Strategy Risk said that Ronnie Chen, who facilitated a $350 million donation to Harvard in 2014, which led to the School of Public Health changing its name to the father of Ronnie. They do that when you donate money, of course. And this is part of the China-United States Exchange Foundation program. What exactly is that? Well, that foundation is a Hong Kong-based society which basically advances the agenda of the CCP overseas. And these are obviously controlled by the United Front, which is a process to co-opt those overseas organizations to advance the CCP's agenda. And this is Charles Lieber, a convicted professor from Harvard who basically did not disclose his research ties to China, was essentially giving the CCP their technologies and whatnot. He's now at a Chinese university. And remember last year there was a speech by the Chinese ambassador to the United States, Xie Feng, and when 2 girls tried to protest, one man stood up and dragged her out. And that guy, later we found out, was probably an offspring of some CCP elite officials, and they're on a student visa here. They're clearly, or maybe they are holding a green card, but whatnot. But they're able to do this in an American institution like that. That is crazy. Grad student at HKS, which is Harvard Kennedy School, and also the CSSA's co-chair for alumni relationship. And so CSSA, for those of you who don't know, is a Chinese Communist Party United Front organization inside university. You can find this in pretty much, if not the same name, different version of the same thing across college campuses in America, in Canada, in Europe, and elsewhere. And their idea is that they work very closely with the local embassy of China or the consulate. They're sometimes even funded by them. They get paid to attend events. If, say, somebody from China comes, they will send a bunch of people to pretend to be like the people that come to be audience members or to welcome them, etc., things like that. They also host a lot of events on campus spreading pro-China propaganda. So that's CSSA. So this guy is often involved in this already, and he also has a twin brother named Zhou Hongyi, who was a research assistant at Harvard and now is a grad student at Columbia. Now, so this guy is very much involved in all sorts of different activities, right? You see here, he's involved with all these kind of events, and then you wonder, this guy, having seen all those international events, he's been in tune with the American value, having lived in the US for so long, yet he's still doing the deeds on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. Makes you wonder, what exactly has these events done for them? Well, clearly they have not changed their vision from the pro-CCP side to one of common value. In fact, these events have, if anything, further brainwashed Chinese students and international students from China and others in the United States to fall to the Chinese propaganda. So this event was hosted by a student group at Harvard Kennedy called Greater China Society. As you can see here is the opening remark for that day. So that was the China conference. And you can also see that with this event, there's a lot of Americans involved. And if you just take a look at some of the names, it seems like they come from all walks of life. You got people from various different sectors, you got professors, business people. And so clearly the event itself is a pro-China event. And what exactly does this event serve in this timeline of US-China relationship deteriorating? Clearly, it's not to promote common universal value. It is to promote the CCP's agenda, and Harvard is allowing that to happen. So that's also Harvard. And reports also found that Harvard received at least 150 million from the CCP. And that's just the amount that we know of. Top CCP officials send their kids here. The attractiveness of Harvard is not to be underestimated. Bo Xilai, for example, his kid, Bo Guagua, was here. Liu He, the key ally of Xi Jinping, was an alumni here. The granddaughter of a CCP elder. Opposite is also true. The CCP is also quite attractive to Harvard because they have the money, they will pay them. In exchange, of course, for huge amounts of data in science, technology, and other research as medical. All of that has been used to aid the evil schemes by the CCP, like organ harvesting, censorship, the persecution against various groups. And I think now something more sinister is coming because they've learned so much about the American society. In a book called America Against America, which was written by Wang Huning, the CCP chief strategist, he essentially outlined all of the things that he had learned while he was touring the United States, and he's now using those aspects against the Americans. From an insider I spoke of, since Xi came into power, he has completely renovated the security and spying apparatus, which is now headed by the Ministry of State Security. And one of their top agenda is the overseas transnational repression against Falun Gong practitioners. And there's a new directive that came out quite recent, which is to utilize the American openness in its legislations, judicial and legal processes to launch legal and public opinion warfares against Falun Gong as part of that transnational repression. And the most prominent attack is against Falun Gong and the performing arts troupe called Shenyun Performing Arts. If you didn't know, there were multiple emails sent to the performing theaters that the troupe was performing at containing bomb threats or killing threats. And these obviously are taken very seriously by the local law enforcement and FBI. So they have to send in the bomb squad to the K9 units to clear out the theater to make sure that everything was okay, sometimes delaying the performances, etc. Now, obviously, a lot of these letters are probably not real, or they were just sent as a threat but not actually going to do it. But still, this is a huge waste of taxpayer dollars on law enforcement, on dispatching them, right? Huge amount of resource, time of these police officers and other emergency personnel who could have been focusing on other issues in that city or that area are being used for this. You have a lot of this generating this idea that Shenyun is dangerous. This type of stuff is completely ignored by the American media and its political class, or most of it has been ignored. There's been some great reports. How exactly does that happen? Why is it an American troop and people who legally came to America are facing this type of threat and danger, and yet there's not a massive amount of reporting on it? Well, simply because the CCP bought out these people over the decade-long relations that they've had. Many of these, got educated in Harvard or they belong to that class, right? The CCP is very proud of their them cultivating these relationships that can later, because obviously those people who have influence here, they can be activated to basically ignore something like this. And specifically against Falun Gong is very interesting because if you look at what happened, and this again goes back to the 800 bro, right? There's huge social divide, this resentment towards the government. When Falun Gong was introduced in 1992, it was preaching truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance as the main characteristics. And society was healing because people were finding their roots back to moral values. And in doing so, obviously from the decades of political movements in China, this was something that was very welcomed. But the CCP requires lies, deception, and violence to survive. So it's contrary to that of the values from Falun Gong, which is why in 1999 they launched the persecution headed by then leader Zhang Zemin. Now, Zhang Zemin was effectively telling the party that the survival of the party depended on ruling out these values, truth, compassion, and tolerance, because that's, again, opposite to that of the CCP. While after the persecution started, people started to, escape China to go to different countries, they had to continue the pursuing of trying to persecute and defeat them overseas. And so that's why you see this huge emphasis on the United States and a huge emphasis on using the legal processes here. Essentially what they're trying to do is waste the time and resource of these people and then to basically load them up with a bunch of legal pursuits, in turn to waste their money, try to destroy their credibilities, at the same time activate these, I call them agents, but they're really just people who are in bed with the CCP, to write articles on them, like for example in the New York Times, to heavily focus on aspects which are obviously not true. So instead of embracing something like Falun Gong where it can heal that society, they're choosing to alienate it, to destroy it. And in doing so, that's why we see the likes of 800 bros popping up in China, because today there is no morals to speak of in China. There is no basic bottom line for people. Anything can happen, and it could be over as little as 120 USD or 800 yuan. Things like that can happen. It is today that they're obviously scared of the situation, but they're also much more scared that if a society were to heal based on those characteristics and not the ones preached by the government, then well, the CCP will cease to exist. And in no position will they want that to happen. And so that's why there is a huge focus here. So between Harvard, between Falun Gong, and between the 800 bros, the biggest lesson to learn here is that we're dealing with a government that has corrupted morals across the board, that have defeated basic human decencies, and in return, they want to rule by fear and they want to rule by violence, which is something that you can see today is starting to creep up on them too. And that's showing with the bottom part of the society, like 800 Bro has done. All right, thanks so much for watching this episode. If you enjoyed the content, leave a like, comment below your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Until next time.